We are continuing a series that we call Stars. It's something we put down and pick up often. It's a character study as we go through the Old Testament. Last time we went through Stars, we looked at the life of Joseph, and then this time we're looking at the life of Moses. We'll be doing that all month long in the month of March. We're on part 2 today, and so maybe if you missed last week and you're just jumping in, it's all good. It's okay. We left off with Moses being found by Pharaoh's daughter in the Nile. After that, we're told that Moses grows up in the royal court of Pharaoh. He grows up, we don't have tons of information about it, but he grows up in basically a life of luxury. He gets the finest education in the world, an Egyptian education. At the time, that was the best education, and has a pretty good life. And he knows that he's a Hebrew. He knows that his people, the Hebrew people, are enslaved, and but yet he is not, and he has a pretty good life. And then one day he's noticing that there is a slave driver, because the Hebrews were enslaved in Egypt. There is a slave driver who is beating a fellow Hebrew, a man apparently he didn't even know, he just knew that he was Hebrew. And we're told that Moses looks, in Exodus 2, he looks this way, he looks that way, and then he attacks and murders the taskmaster, the slave driver, buries him in the sand. And he knew that even though Pharaoh was like a grandfather sort of figure, he wasn't like as if he was close necessarily. A lot of like movies and things like that depict like Moses like being, like prince or second in command. That's not really the case. He was in the royal family court, but it's not as if he could have ascended to the throne or anything like that. Because here's how we know. Because Pharaoh wanted him dead. Because he killed a taskmaster, a slave driver. And he knew that he had to get out of town, and so he flees for his life. He goes to the backside of the desert. He flees to a place called Midian. Now, if you're thinking of the Middle East and you're thinking about Israel and you go south, or maybe if you're thinking about Egypt and you go east, you'll come to a place called the Sinai Peninsula, and you'll also come to a place called Saudi Arabia. And so the Midianite people live in Saudi Arabia, and that Sinai Peninsula. The Midianites are descendants of Ishmael, who is the son of Abraham and Hagar. And out of Ishmael come a number of nations, and one of them are the Midianites. Today, the Midianites would be very much related, other people as well, who call it the Arabs. And they come from that part of the area. These are the Midianites. And they were a very powerful kingdom. And it would appear that Moses flees there to have protection from the Egyptians, and he's probably thinking, no one's going to come looking for me here in this area. And we're told that he gets married. He meets a girl. He meets a Midianite woman, and he gets married. So he has a family, has a father-in-law, he has in-laws, he has some children, and he becomes a shepherd. So he goes from the royal courts of Egypt, which is sort of the center of the world at this time. It was the most industrious, sort of advanced area in the world. And to the backside of the desert, living in a tent, watching sheep in the desert. It's sort of a night and day difference, the life that Moses is now living as a shepherd. And in Exodus chapter 3, he's getting along just fine. He has his new life. He's a fugitive. Things are going well. He has his plan. His plan is to watch the sheep, to take over the family business from his father-in-law, and to live and die in Midian. Not a bad thing. Being a shepherd then is a perfectly fine life. Nothing wrong with it. But that's his plan. But it was not God's plan. The principle today is that God is calling you into action. Now, as you sit here, you may be thinking, yeah, you're calling my wife into action. Yes, God, yes, you are. He's calling you into action. Oh, Lord, I get it. You're calling that person on the other side of the church, you're calling them into action. No, he's calling you into action. He's calling you into action. Action to do what? Let's find out. Exodus chapter 3, it will be up on the screen. You may want to pull out a hard copy of the scriptures to follow along, or a digital copy on your phone or tablet, whatever. Exodus 3, we're told, now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. Moms, soon-to-be moms, expecting mothers, going to have a boy. Keep it in mind, Jethro. Keep it in mind. Is a name. Consider it. Isn't that a great name, Jethro? His father-in-law has a business where they keep sheep, and Moses works for him. He's also the priest of Midian. You see, Moses grew up in Egypt with a pantheon of gods of the Egyptians. Now, he knew about the true living God, the God of his forefathers, but he also knew about all of the Egyptian gods. And now he lives in a land and he has family that now they are pagans and they worship a pantheon of false gods, the gods of the Midianites. So Moses has this, he knows about the God of his forefathers, but he also knows about this pantheon of false gods across the board. I would say Moses is probably somewhat theologically confused. But all of that is going to get remedied here in Exodus chapter 3 as God calls him. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb. Horeb is also, in other parts of Exodus, is called Sinai. Mount Sinai, where Moses will later return, not today, but he will later return to receive the 10 Commandments. It's also called Horeb, the mountain of God, as it will become known. This is in what's the Sinai Peninsula. This is just east of Egypt. It is actually modern day Egypt. Egypt owns the Sinai Peninsula, and just south of Israel. The Sinai Peninsula. And in verse 2, we're told an angel of the Lord. So he's keeping the flock. He's out in the desert. Verse 2 says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. Angel of the Lord, this is a clear reference to what's called a Christophany, an appearance of Jesus before the incarnation. The second person of the Trinity throughout the Old Testament, who will become known as Jesus Christ later on when he's born as a baby in the manger, is oftentimes referred to in the Old Testament as the angel of the Lord. Not that Jesus is an angel. He is not. He is God. This is just simply a reference and a way for God's people to understand that God is actively moving in form on the earth. In this particular time, God takes the appearance of a burning bush. You might say, it wouldn't be wrong to say, Jesus appears to Moses in a burning bush before his incarnation, speaking to Moses. Now, you do the homework on what a burning bush is and how that works. And so there is this bush. It is on fire, but yet it is not consumed up. And Moses sees this from a distance or up close. We're not really sure. We're not really told. But he is pretty amazed by it. Here's what I love about it. God is willing to meet Moses where he is. This is what God does. God encounters people right where they live. In your life, God is encountering you. He's trying to get your attention right where you live. In your context, he is willing to come down on our level, and he is willing to reveal himself to us in one way or another. And in this case for Moses, it happens to be a burning bush. Whoa, got his attention. God is out to get your attention because he's calling you to action. And then God goes on to identify himself to Moses. And Moses said, well, first he says in verse 3, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why this bush is not burned. Very logical, Moses, good job, because that's what we would all do. Then in verse 4, he says, when the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him from the bush. The angel of the Lord. This is a manifestation of Jesus, because we know it's God who is actually speaking, and says, Moses, Moses, and he said to him, here I am. You got to love how this passage is just packed with good theology. First of all, we know that God is sovereign, that God is transcendent. He is beyond us. He is bigger than us. He is creator. He is Lord of all. He holds the universe in the palm of his hands. And we see, and we will come to see the majesty and holiness of God. Look at verse 6. And he said to him, I am the God. Verse 5, I skipped it. Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. So as Moses approaches this site, God, through this burning bush that actually isn't burning up, calls out his personal name. Moses says, here I am. And as he approaches, God says, whoa. Here's what I gather from this. You see, all of the false gods of Egypt and the false gods of Midian, the false gods of Rome and Greece, and the false gods of you name it, any pantheon you want to name, it's all pretty much the same, that these false gods are very human-like. These false gods are very much fallen. They have odd stories. They commit atrocities toward one another. You've been in 7th grade and you've read the Greek mythologies. They're all about the same stuff. And when it comes to paganism, the gods were very approachable. And the idea was to appease the gods and the idols associated with the gods so that you could get stuff. Listen, the ancient people, they would feed the gods. They would bathe their idols. They would talk to their idols. They treat them almost like a pet, honestly. Hoping that this false god would give them rain or fertility or victory in battle or whatever whatever it was, whether it was the sun god, the moon god, the dirt god, the wind god, the relationship god, whatever it was. That's how they went about it. And people all over the world are still doing this, by the way, trying to treat God like some genie. And there's this sort of very sort of closeness when it comes to trying to approach the gods and having this odd relationship with an idol. There's not a lot of holiness. There's not a lot of fear. There's not a lot of reverence. And it would appear that this is what Moses is used to. And his holiness, God and his transcendence calls Moses out. Stop. I am holy. This is holy ground. You see, the true living God is perfect. There's no flaw in him. From God is the very source of truth and life. He is the standard of what is right and what is wrong. But yet at the same time, he calls Moses his name. So we see both things. We see the majesty of the transcendence of God, his sovereignty. He's creator, he's boss, he's Lord, he's holy, yet he's personal. And he calls out Moses. Moses knows his name. Imminent, close, near. This is what God is like, and Moses is learning the lesson. And God goes on to identify himself even more. He says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And we know Jacob is Israel. His name will be turned to Israel. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look to God. It's a beautiful thing. You see, Moses only knew the stories about the God of his forefathers. They had not been yet written down yet. Moses will be the one who codifies and writes down the story of Genesis and the first 5 books of the Old Testament, even Exodus, this story right here. They had only learned about God through oral tradition passed on to them. I would imagine in some ways, for Moses, the stories of how God moved in the life of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob seem like far off, distant accounts, not close and near in reality to where he was, but they are now. And so in reverence and awe, he responds as God reveals his identity to Moses. It's a pretty beautiful thing. And then we see the heart of God even more. Look at verse 7. I have surely seen the affliction of my people. You see, God is not just calling out to Moses for the fun of it. Some people, this is what they want. They want God to in some way reveal himself to them because some people believe they are the center of the universe and that God should somehow do a trick and somehow God impress me, show me that you are this or that, and then I will believe in you. That's not why God is doing this for Moses. He's doing this because he's calling him to action. He's calling you to action. And then we see the heart of God. This is why he is calling him. He doesn't know it yet, but this is why. I have surely seen the affliction of my people, verse 7, who are in Egypt, who have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their suffering. I wonder what Moses was thinking. I bet Moses is thinking inside, he's thinking, yes, thank you, finally. See, I saw it too, God. And that's why I totally murdered that slave driver. Yes, thank you. I see their affliction too. Man, it's pretty bad, Lord. This is a bad deal. I bet inside he's almost applauding God yes, you get it. We're beat down. We're slaves. Thank you, Lord. This is so great of you. And he goes on in verse 8, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians. I bet in his heart Moses was just yes! Oh, this is what I was hoping for. You understand the pain of my people, the Hebrew people. You get it. And you're going to deliver them? Yes, I'm so on board with this. This is so amazing that you would do this, God. And we see the benevolence and compassion of God, who is creator, mighty, sovereign, in charge, transcendent, beyond, yet near and close, and calls out our name. And Moses' name is also compassionate, concerned, and good. He cares about justice. He cares about righteousness. And he cares about the oppression of his people. And he says, and I'm going to bring them out into that land, to a good and broad land. Again, I bet Moses is yes, we've been needing that. We need our own land. And he goes on, it is a land of milk and honey. Yes, I bet Moses is saying, good. This is the kind of land that we've been hoping for. A land that we can defend. Our own land. We can have our own borders and we can have our own nation. By the way, this is what the Jewish people need. They've always needed this. Anytime the Jewish people are in somebody else's land, it's never good for them. The enemy, as we talked about last week, stands against them to destroy them and wipe them out. But when they have their own land, they can defend themselves. A land of milk and honey. And he goes on to tell them it's the place of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, and Hivites, and Jebusites. These are all Canaanites, by the way. And let me just say one quick thing, because the Jewish people will drive them out. And they have commands by God to do so. And a lot of people get a really bad taste in their mouth because God told them to do that. Well, here's the deal. The Canaanite people reached a place of moral rock bottom. You need to remember this. And when people hit a place of moral rock bottom, God judges them. God judges people who hit moral rock bottom oftentimes with other people. The Canaanites were absolutely filled up with sexual immorality of every sort. Stuff I can't even talk about here in church. You can read about it though. The Canaanites had a regular practice of every single family taking their firstborn child and sacrificing their firstborn child to Baal or Moloch. It's a regular practice. It was moral rock bottom. So guess what God does with people who are at the moral rock bottom? He plays God. It's kind of odd that the skeptic oftentimes gets mad when there's injustice. Where is God in this incredible injustice? And then turns right around and also gets mad when God plays God about the injustice. Which side of the coin you want to have it? By the way, God will also use other nations to punish Israel later in their history because they too will reach moral rock bottom. So take that to the bank. There you go. But God will give the land of these people, the Canaanites who have hit moral rock bottom, He will give it to the nation of Israel. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, verse 9, and I have seen their oppression for which the Egyptians oppressed them. And again, I just kind of see Moses as like, yes, God, thank you. Finally, somebody gets it. The Egyptians, man, they're enslaving us. They are just oppressing us. And it's incredibly difficult. And we don't deserve this. And we're just like being beat down and worked to death and on. And it's hard. We need our own land. Thank you, Lord, finally. And you're going to deliver us? Yes. And he's just kind of like cheering and championing God. I just kind of sense that he's at least doing that inwardly. I would be. Because this is why he's in Midian. Because this whole slavery issue, he wanted to solve it himself, Moses, with violence. I'll deliver my own people. I'll start a revolution, and I'll start by killing that guy. Oh, this ain't going to work. He has to flee for his life. He's over here in Midian like, man, I tried. I did what I could. I took one out. It didn't work. Because Moses was all about doing it his own way. That wasn't going to work. But God has now revealed himself to him through a burning bush. God is compassionate. God cares. What's God going to do? Oh, God's going to deliver them. Yes, God, you are amazing. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh. Whoa, bro. Stop, God. Hold on. That's often how we are, isn't it? God is calling you to action. Is there something going on in the world that grinds your gears? Is there something going on in the world that you seemingly cannot tolerate? Is there something going on in the world that God has moved in your heart and stirred in you? Verse 10. God is going to rescue. God has seen their affliction. God has seen their pain. And he involves Moses in verse 10. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh. You may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Calls Moses into action. He's calling you into action. Don't sit here today and say, it's probably the person sitting beside me he's calling into action. Nope, you. You. Oh, them too. But you. What kind of action? Are you in bondage and in slavery? He's calling you to action. He's calling you to freedom, freedom that only comes through Jesus. Are you enslaved by sin? Is there something that has you in bondage and in chains, and are you oppressed through some mess that you've involved yourself in possibly? Listen, there's freedom through the cross. There's freedom through the blood of Jesus. And you might be sitting here today, oh, Pastor, I think that's for somebody else. It's for you. He's calling you. Is there some burden that God has put on your heart, fellow believer? Is there something that He has emboldened and put a passion in your life about? Maybe it's about caring for the orphan. Maybe it's the foster child. Maybe it's someone who doesn't know Jesus. Maybe it's a family member or friend who is far from God, and that bugs you. He's calling you. Maybe it's Maybe it's human trafficking and slavery, like we see right here in the Bible, that still goes on around the world today. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's people who don't have the Word of God translated in their language. Maybe it's people who don't know about Jesus. Maybe it's some area or place that doesn't have a church. Maybe it's right here in your own community. God is putting a burden on your heart, and He's calling you to do something about it, and to do something about it for Jesus. I don't know. He's calling you to action. Maybe the enemy has been kicking your family around. Maybe he's been oppressing your life and you haven't had much victory, spiritual victory. Maybe he's calling you to action, to do something about it. But I know this, that God is calling every person to action. God encounters us. He reveals Himself to us. We see His heart. We see His transcendence. We see His immanence. And yet He still calls us by name and calls us to action. Now I want you to look to your neighbor, look to someone around you, and with some chutzpah, say to them, you have no excuse. You have no excuse. You can say it to me, Brother Richard. Say it. No excuse. Brother Wayne, no excuse. You can say it back. I can take it. You have no excuse. God's calling you to action and you have no excuse. How many of you in here love excuses? Is there anybody in here like, I'm an excuse machine? Yeah. Thomas Gilmore, your hand is enthusiastically raised. A little concerned. Yeah, excuses. Listen, you want to know who's good at excuses? Humans. All of us, we're good at excuses. Moses is no different. I would imagine when in verse 10, I can just almost see it in Moses' face. When God says to him, go, I'm sending you to the most powerful man in the entire world to set free 1 million people who are in captive because of slaves. I just imagine Moses' face, his Jewish face, turning white and just like taking a big deep breath like, no, what? And the first excuse comes out of his mouth rather quickly because we are excuse machines. But Moses said to God, who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Who am I? There's an excuse for you. I'm a nobody. I shouldn't be in this line of work, God. You must be thinking of someone else, not me. I bet you've given an excuse like this. I'm not important enough. I'm not the man. I'm not the woman for the job. God goes on to say, oh, yes, you are. Notice verse 14. I'm sorry. The next excuse, verse 13. If I come to the people of Israel and say to him, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, they will ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? That's his second excuse. Who am I? I'm a nobody. And then he goes on. Verse 13, they're not going to listen to me. Has anybody ever said that? I can't teach in kids' church. They'll never listen to me. I can't do that job. They're not going to pay attention. They're not going to have any respect for that. It'll never work. I got to talk about verse 14 because I believe this alters Moses' complete understanding of who God is, and it ought to alter yours. Look at verse 14. God said to Moses, so he's wondering, who do I tell them that you are? They're not going to listen. And he says, God said to Moses, I am who I am. Oh, thanks for clearing that up, God. And he said, say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. I am has sent me to you. Moses' entire life, he had known gods that were no different than humans. And he related to them as such, flippantly. And so in some way, Moses wants to put God in like this container, this box. I got to know who you are. Are you the God of the sun? Are you the dirt God? Are you the star God? Like, what are you? Give me a name. Are you like Ra? Is that who you're like? Or like whatever name of the God of the Midianites? Come on, I got to know your name, God. In other words, I got to be able to put you in this like tidy little box. I got to be able to wrap you up in a bow. I got to be able to deliver you to your people, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's not going to work. So I got to be able to sell you. I got to be able to market you if I'm going to do this, because this is how paganism worked, and this is how Moses thought. And what God says to him is simply amazing. Because God tells Moses, my name is I am. The best way that people know how to pronounce it is Yahweh in the Hebrew. And the interesting thing about Yahweh, or I am, is that it's a verb. It's not even a noun. It's an action. Hey, Jamie, I am going to the store. I will be back. It's that same verb. We have it in English. You use it all the time. And God tells Moses, that's my name. It's a verb. Can I maybe try to help you handle that? It's as if God is saying to Moses, Moses, you can't put me in a box. It's some translations use this word I am as eternal one who just exists, one who is, the self-existent one. God just is. Past, was, is, will be. God exists. He cannot be contained by your thoughts. He doesn't fit into your box. He can't be categorized or labeled and sold and marketed. No, he's Yahweh, the only God, the true living God, the God who is active, the God who appears, the God who moves, the only one there is. Blows Moses' lid. But he continues to give excuses. I'm not qualified. Who am I? They're not going to listen to me. How can I put you in a box? He goes on. The next excuse comes in Exodus chapter 4, verse 1. Look at his excuse there. If we can put that up in the back. Exodus 4, verse 1. He says, behold, but they will not believe me or listen to my voice. For they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. They're not going to believe me. They're not going to, I'm a nobody. They're not going to listen to me. They're not going to believe me. And God goes on from there. Here, I'm going to give you the ability to perform miraculous signs and wonders and miracles. And he explains that to Moses. No, they're going to believe you. You're going to turn water into blood, man. The staff will become a snake. Like your mind is going to be blown by the things that I'm going to give you the ability to do in my name. Verse 10, all the way down in verse 10 comes the next excuse. Chapter 4, verse 10. Moses is full of excuses. Excuses. God is calling you into action, and when he does, oftentimes all we do is have excuses. I'm not the right person for the job. I'm a nobody. They're not going to listen to me. God, your plan doesn't work. It's not going to work because in verse 10, I'm not good at speaking. He says, oh my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or now in speech or in tongue. I don't have the skills. I don't know how to drive that hammer. I don't know how to build that ark. I don't know how to do that, God. I can't pull this off. I don't got the right tool set. And for Moses, he's like, I stutter a lot. I can't do this. No, God goes on to explain, I'll provide, I'll equip you. And God recruits his brother Aaron. Now Moses has pulled his brother into the equation. You know that's going to make for an odd Thanksgiving. Oh, gee whiz, thanks, Moses. And I think we get in verse 13 really the heart of it all. Let's look at his final excuse in verse 13. Chapter 4, verse 13. But he said, could you imagine having this long argument with God? But that's what Moses is doing. God called him to go to Pharaoh, and he's like, excuse 1. Nope. Okay, how about this excuse? That ain't going to work. Okay, number 3. He keeps going after 3 times. Number 4. Nope. Final excuse. And I think this is really gut level honesty. It's still an excuse, but I think finally Moses is just being real honest. Verse 13. Oh, my Lord, please send someone else. I think he's just being honest. I think he's out of real good excuses, and he's just going to give the most honest excuse. Can I give you the Daniel Sweet translation paraphrase? God, I don't want to. I don't want to do it. Pick someone else. I'm out. Almost as if like when I'm on my recliner, my zero gravity, which I love it. And Jamie's like, hey, why don't you go pull all the weeds out of that flower bed so we can make our house look nice for one spring? And I say, oh, honey, such a windy day. You been outside, Jamie? Allergies. Whoa, killer. All the wind? Not today. What am I saying? Ladies, what am I saying? I don't want to. I don't want to do it. You know what that means. I don't want to do it. God is calling us into action, and there's no excuse. There's no excuse. And if we were to be real honest with ourselves, oftentimes we just say, I don't want to. Go reach your neighbor, I don't want to. Go serve, I don't want to. Get serious about your spiritual walk, I don't want to.